Hello there. I'm here to respond to Jake Fitzsimons, who might have a bias to keep commander damage in his article, so I'll be here to argue against having commander damage in the rules. Fair warning, I am biased to getting rid of this rule. For those who don't know, Commander is the most popular format in Magic the Gathering, a card game. It mostly adds some deck construction rules and some play rules, one of which is rule number 9, commander damage rule. If a player has been dealt 21 points of commander damage by a particular commander during the game, that player loses the game. Another thing to point out is that we're also talking about this a lot thanks to Mark Rosewater's podcast 711, where he discusses the potential changes, one of which is the commander damage rule change. So let's take a look at the big picture. What is best for the format? Now, Mark is mostly concerned about, is it worth the cognitive load? That's one of the main points he brings up. I want to expand that question to, does commander damage make the game more fun as a whole? Now, take into account all the people who are playing, not just the player trying to win with commander damage. Now, here are some reasons to get rid of commander damage. The one that's most often brought up, I feel, is how often does commander damage actually matter? Is it taking up too much cognitive load, meaning that it's just taking up too much space in your brain? For example, mana burn was a rule in Magic. It didn't matter enough though. Wizards tried playtesting Magic without the mana burn rule for a whole month. The result? It just never came up for the entire month. So now, is that true for commander damage? Now, it's pretty hard to collect data for a casual format like Commander. Please, somebody else collect it for me. I've tried a little bit here in my video. Thankfully, someone else has also tried, and they are the command zone. So most of my data is going to be biased. A lot of it is going to be based off of MTGO, because that's an easy way to gather stats. You just go to the MTGO like near the end, and you can see what the end result is. So for purposes of my discussion, I'm mostly going to be looking at how many times do people lose and how do they lose. So over the course of 1,264 games, 454 lose because of combat damage, meaning a creature attacked them and they died. So that's the most common way to lose. Combo is actually the most common way to lose if it's non-combat, non-combo. So sorry, I skipped the gun a little. Non-combat, non-combo is the next most common way to lose. This basically means exsanguinate. It means torment of hailfire. There's other ways to lose, I guess. There's like lightning bolt, basically some other random way. Combo is 101, so that's the next most common way to lose. This, I believe, mostly means someone went infinite, so maybe they took infinite combat steps, infinite turns, and then your opponents just gave up. Something like that. Commander damage. Finally, we get to commander damage. It's actually pretty high up on this list. Still not in very common. 56 out of 1,264 total ways to lose. Only 4% of people will actually lose the commander damage. Maybe it's less because people block and they try to avoid commander damage. That is viable. But then again, people are also blocking and trying not to die to regular combat damage. So I don't see how, blocking is somehow making this number less. You probably want to avoid losing no matter what. Impact is the next most likely. Surprisingly, people are just running, I think it's the specific card is called Triumph of the Hordes. Otherwise, people are playing Skittles. Another common one is there's an equipment that grants infect, and then there's some auras that also grant infect. Everything else also just kind of sucks. Mill, I'm actually shocked that Mill is up here. Good for you, Mill players. And other is probably somebody's trying to win Baron Glory. Whoever you are, keep trying. I'm sure you will win. Blank actually just means the player won. So yeah, probably the next most. You're more likely to win than you are to lose to non-combat, non-combo. Good for you, man. So to me, this tells me that command damage is somewhat likely. 4% though means that if you were to play a game, you are probably not going to lose the command damage. you have a 50% chance to lose to combat or non-combat non-combo. Otherwise, the other 50%, 25% chance to win, and the other 25% is just random stuff. One of which is Commander. So, like, out of all the 4 people, I don't think it's even likely that any of you lose to Commander damage over the course of the game, assuming you're playing with 4 players, and so you would have to play multiple games before you even see anyone lose to Commander damage. So I don't really buy that this is high enough. I think before you read these stats, actually, you should have made a number and guessed at how often does Commander damage even come up. And like, because at one end of the spectrum, it's like 0%. Then in which case, we should always remove it. And the other end of the spectrum, it's like 99%. We're always dying to Commander damage. And to me, this number is just not high enough for me to care about Commander damage. Another problem is it's an unintuitive rule. Right here, I'm showing Shivan Dragon because it has flying, an example of an intuitive rule, easy to explain. Mana burn is extremely unintuitive in my opinion. The metaphor was always that mana is like money. It's going to burn a hole in your pocket if you don't use it. But last I checked, my wallets have never had holes in my pockets just because I didn't spend the money. All right, technically I lose about 2% per year due to inflation or something, but that's just, that doesn't burn a hole in my pocket. I just lose 2% every year. Another reason to get rid of Commander damage is one player might be left out if someone is quickly knocked out due to Commander damage. This actually was brought up by a good friend, Jake Fitzsimons. So you might think that this is a great situation, the game should end soon. Well, it's not guaranteed that the Voltron player, who aka the Commander damage dealing player, is going to knock out everyone after they just knock out one person. They could just be board wiped or removed and be left there doing nothing. That means that one player is actually just gonna not play the game or do anything for a solid like 30 or 40 minutes. Who knows, maybe longer, maybe less. It's like being put into a penalty box for getting hit for 21 Commander damage. Admittedly, this can still happen even if we get rid of the Commander damage rule, but might happen less. I'm happy if it just happens less. Case in point is the Commander Clash Live AFR, where Tomer actually died due to Commander damage. Great, that's one more point for our stats, but it also wasn't really a great experience for Tomer. He was left sitting around for 40 minutes while the other 3 players were just playing the game. And it's not like the Voltron or Commander damage dealing player was likely to kill the other players. Tomer just happened to not have any blockers, not have anything going on in his hand. I wouldn't even argue he was a real threat. He was just kind of being lazy and didn't really think, oh, can the Voltron or equipment place player quickly deal like 16 plus damage to me? And he was just too lazy to do the math. Like, why would we do the math and think so hard about a casual game? We just want to look at one number. And so Tomer inadvertently fell into this noob trap of dying to Commander damage. And I think the joy that Richard felt from eliminating Tomer on turn 5 is being eclipsed by the fact that Tomer has to wait on average 5 or more turns before the game ends. Commander games typically take about 10 turns, so he's going to be waiting a while, and in reality he waited about 40 minutes. And so I think intuitively people understand that they want to play nice. They just don't want to single someone out, knock them out. Like, people take offense if you just constantly attack them every single game, by default. He's like, why you attack me every single game? Why don't you just attack other people? Then you just say to them, well, because I think you're the threat. I think, you have the most expensive deck. I just always attack right. Who knows? But there are some cards that Wizards has printed to try to encourage the strategy that people have intuitively decided to gravitate towards, which is spread the love, try to attack people randomly. Don't really try to piss anyone off, basically, and or else you might lose a friend if you just keep attacking one person relentlessly, like you don't like them for some reason. Unfortunately, I feel like Commander damage just doesn't actually encourage that sort of gameplay. Why would you spread the love and split the Commander damage? It doesn't actually help you knock anyone out, which is the whole point of command damage. And if you split the damage, it actually also encourages other people, or it increases the likelihood that command damage won't even matter. Because then if everyone's splitting the damage, everyone's just going to get to low life. And why did we keep track of this extra number when you're at 10 life or 5 life? And why do we have this command damage rule that encourages the bad state of, singling someone out? Why do we have this command damage rule that encourages people to play a less fun way, or encourages people to move towards a bad game state? This is a hot take, but another reason to get rid of command damage is it will improve life gain decks. People always say like life gain is such a big problem, but to me, I'm more about why are we pushing down life gain? Why are we putting down life gain? And that without command damage, gaining life would be the de facto strategy. After all, if you gain life, that's basically the same as waiting. I'm always confused by this after all, if you gain life, that's basically the same thing as winning. I'm always confused by this since nowhere in the rules does it say gaining life will cause you to win the game. Personally, I've never even seen life gain as a good strategy. Historically, it's just a limited trap where you have these bad cards that only gain life. They're just bad. You're just down a card if you spend an entire card to gain life, and then you have to combine it with a second card to essentially make a good effect. And if you're combining 2 bad cards to make a good effect, you probably should have just played 1 good card to get a good effect instead of spending 2 different cards. Another question I have for those life gain decks is, why not let the life gain players have their fun? Do you have to lose the life gain's fun just so that you can have fun with your Voltron or commander damage based strategy? Why not have the Soul Sisters deck have more of their fun, or their Tristani decks gain more life? And to me, it's also confusing because life gain is a white based strategy. A lot of life gain cards are white. Sure, green and black are okay at gaining life, especially with Strixhaven, but white is actually the best at gaining life all the way back to alpha with Healing Salve. Not exactly a great card. I don't know if people are playing that card at all. So, in the interest of fairness, we'll talk about some common reasons why we should keep command damage. Now, one reason they bring up is you should just keep track of command and damage when it matters. So it's like an optional rule. So if you do damage with Marin or some random commander that probably isn't going to win with command damage, you shouldn't keep track of it. You should just be like, okay, I just did 3 or 2 random damage. I'm never going to attack you again. Just don't bother keeping track. There's a huge flaw with this, in my opinion. If command damage is optional suddenly, each time you do combat damage with your commander, you have to make a decision. If your goal is to win or just play optimally, then you should probably always keep track of commander damage. After all, it might matter. If the only reason is that it's a pain to keep track of this commander damage stuff, then your game probably shouldn't be designed with rules that are a pain to keep track of. Just don't make rules that are painful. Another reason is that this is a huge slippery slope. If a rule is optional, then why have this rule at all? In CDH, combat damage rarely will eliminate players. Life totals are mostly just the resource that you use. So why even bother keeping track of health? Why even bother keeping track of combat damage? Should we bother to flip a coin to Mana Crypt? After all, in CDH, it probably won't matter. Someone will win by turn 5 or 7 with some infinite combo. So if you make commanded damage optional, you might as well just rule 0 it out and just never keep track of it, or always keep track of it. You shouldn't just go halfway. Another reason I see is enable some decks. Some decks rely on commander damage to be a thing and to win with it. I think Mark Rosewater rebukes this the best. Any rule will create decks. It doesn't matter what the rule is. Any rule will make strategies more viable or less viable. In this case, commander damage is making Voltron or Boggles more viable and is making life gain less viable, and control to that extent, assuming the control deck actually cares about gaining life. For example, let's say you allow 250 card decks. Suddenly Yorion and Battle of the Wits become viable. Is it really that important to make those decks viable? Does it make the game better? You shouldn't really ask yourself, how many decks does it enable? You should ask yourself, does it make the game, the format better? I don't actually care if we have Yorion decks in EDH. I don't care if we have Life Gain decks in EDH. I just care, does it make the game, does it make the format better? Speaking of Life Gain, it does in fact keep Life Gain in check. After all, without commander damage, Life Gain would be this oppressive strategy. We would all be suffering under Life Gain. Ironically, I think Life Gain is something that Voltron actually excels at. If you have one Boggle that has lifelink, then boom, suddenly every time you attack, you're getting a huge chunk of life. So I think Voltron and Boggle decks will be just fine, even if we get rid of commander damage. This is a side tangent. I really want players to just... This is a side tangent. I really want players to test if commander damage is fun by testing it with their Boggle or Voltron decks. See if you actually need commander damage. Personally, I think it's a crutch. My Voltron decks are actually just fine without it. And half the time, they don't even win with commander damage. Usually, it's just 1 or 2 extra turns without commander damage. And if you can't win in with the turns you have, you probably can't win with 1 or 2 extra turns. The point is just test it out. See if it makes your games more fun, less fun, your Voltron decks more viable, less viable. Who knows? I think you can pontificate here on the internet as much as you want. If you don't actually test how the format is, then who cares? Another argument I see is that it keeps the game shorter. I mostly reject that by looking at the data. Sure, games will be slightly shorter if you do 21 command damage instead of 40 combat damage, or just 40 damage in general. All the data we've indicated is that command damage isn't what's ending games. It's combat damage first and foremost. The second most likely is surprisingly non-combo, non-combat damage. Another reason I hear is it keeps commander special. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Wizards of the Coast is releasing commander products all the time, and I've been counting how many of those commander products that I could see have a viable commander combat damage strategy. Out of all of them, only 8 I see as a viable strategy. Most of them are like Marin, they're like Uzuri. They just have commanders that just sit around, they put a huge deck building constraint on you, or not, and then they accrue value, or they accrue some sort of strategy. Most of them aren't trying to, that strategy doesn't involve the commander attacking at all, so only 14% of the commanders actually are even interested in attacking. The other vast majority are just don't want to attack. You don't want to attack because there are random spells that punish you for attacking. Cards like mostly white that just damage tapped creatures, kill tapped creatures, or exile tapped or attacking creatures. Maybe your opponent has the Aetherize. You don't want your commander to ever be in a dangerous situation, so just don't attack with it. And I believe commander is plenty special without the combat damage aspect. And Wizards of the Coast is just keeping pushing us product that really just doesn't care about commander damage. So it really, really affect any of those precons, or at least 90% of them. Another reason I hear is that the cognitive load isn't that high. How high? Another reason I hear is the cognitive load isn't that high. Surely, keeping track of 3 other commanders isn't that high. Maybe with partners, it could go up to 6. Maybe with your own, it could go up to 8. Personally, I don't think it's that hard. I'm a pretty enfranchised player. I've played EDH for years, but at one point, I didn't play EDH for years. I was once a new player, and I at once sucked at Magic. How many times do you see new players never attack because they're afraid their opponent has a profitable attack or block? How many times does your new player just forget that double blocking is a thing? or multi-blocking even. New players, they really don't like attacking. They had to put Ulamog's Crusher attacks each turn if able, because the new players just didn't know that you should attack. I don't see how adding this extra rule is going to make commander damage or commander more inviting. Okay, I'll try that again. So the problem I see here is that the cognitive load isn't that high for an enfranchised player. We have practiced standard or modern or whatever, but for new players, they're learning everything. And just getting new players to attack and learn how blocking works, learn how drawing cards is good, is enough of a hurdle. I don't think adding another rule like commander damage is going to help. Adding more numbers for that new player to keep track of is genuinely hard. I don't want this format to die, and making the game harder for new players to get into is one way for it to stop growing and start dying.